Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into a tough subject, unsolved child abductions.
Yeah.
We've got 15 cases lined up to go through. Some you'll probably recognize, some maybe not so much. But every single one is a story of mystery and heartbreak that just hasn't gone away. We'll be jumping around the globe a bit, from the U.S. to Australia, going back decades.
Wow.
Cases like Madeleine McCann vanishing from that resort in Portugal,
Mhm.
to the Bobby Dunbar case, talk about mistaken identity. That one feels like it came straight out of a movie script.
Right.
Well, I've got an expert with me today to help try to make sense of it all. Ready to jump in.
Absolutely. These cases, they're always so complicated and often they're just tragic.
Yeah.
But, I think they can give us a lot of insight into how investigations work, how society changes, and the psychology of it all, how it just keeps affecting everyone, long after the news has moved on.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with a case that really shook America. Eden Patz, 1979, New York City. Vanished on his way to the school bus. And honestly, this case completely changed how we think about keeping kids safe. But I bet most people don't even realize how his disappearance really changed things.
Yeah, it's true. Edon's case, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. I mean, think about it. His face on milk cartons.
Right.
The creation of National Missing Children's Day, these weren't just like symbolic gestures, they sparked a whole national movement. And that led to actual changes in the law, like the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children Act in 1994.
Wait, so break that down for me. How did one case lead to a brand new law so many years later?
Well, you had all this public outcry, the media was just focused on Eaton's case, and it put a ton of pressure on lawmakers to actually do something.
Yeah.
The Jacob Wetterling Act, named after another child who was abducted, established a national sex offender registry. It gave law enforcement a tool they desperately needed to keep track of people who were a threat to children.
Wow, so that's Eden Patz's legacy. I mean, an entire system to track potential offenders, all coming from this one heartbreaking case.
Exactly. It really shows the power of public awareness and advocacy, even when you're dealing with such a horrible loss.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about another impactful case. Cherry Mahan, 1985, Pennsylvania. Now, I kind of remember this one vaguely. Wasn't there something about a blue van?
Yes, the blue van. It had the skier on the side, and it was seen by Cherry's bus stop right around when she disappeared. This detail, it became critical to the investigation.
Okay.
And it's a perfect example of how a visual cue like that can really grab the public's attention.
So did they ever find the van? Was it actually connected to her disappearance?
Sadly, no. Even with tons of leads and they searched everywhere, both the van and Cherry are still missing. But that image of the van, it became like a symbol. It was on missing posters, news reports, everywhere. It even helped kickstart the Have You Seen Me campaign.
Oh, right, those posters. Milk cartons, grocery stores, everywhere. So Cherry's case was like the beginning of that whole nationwide effort to find missing kids.
Exactly. Her disappearance, along with some others, made it clear that we needed a system to get the word out about missing children all across the country. And the Have You Seen Me campaign, with those pictures everyone recognized, came directly from that need.
It's amazing to think that these tragedies, as awful as they are, can lead to such massive changes in how we react as a society.
It is.
Okay, so from milk cartons to something, well, a bit more recent, Madeleine McCann, 2007, gone, vanished from a vacation apartment in Portugal. And suddenly, the whole world is hooked on this case. What was it about this one that grabbed everyone's attention like that?
Well, Madeleine's disappearance had all the elements of a mystery that could resonate globally. You have this young girl, a family vacation turned into a nightmare, and then the setting, a foreign country. It sparked debates about how law enforcement works across borders, and what role the media should play in investigations like this.
And then there were all those theories, right? Everyone seemed to have an opinion on what happened.
Oh, absolutely. The McCann case became this breeding ground for speculation, and the media coverage definitely didn't help.
Right.
They often blurred the lines between what was fact and what was just a guess. It also brought to light the challenges of investigating across international borders and the unbelievable pressure families face under that kind of scrutiny.
It's interesting how certain cases become these worldwide events, while others, even though they're just as tragic, don't get that same level of attention.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to the U.S. for a minute. We've been talking about cases that really spark change, but what about the impact on families? Just one family, Let's look at Michaela Garrick, 1988, California, abducted right out of a grocery store parking lot, broad daylight.
Yeah.
Just gone.
Michaela's case is a chilling reminder of how random these tragedies can be. It can happen in places we think of as safe, everyday places.
Right.
Her mother, Sharon, became a major advocate for missing children, turning her grief into action.
It's hard to even grasp that kind of strength, to take a loss like that and turn it into something positive.
Sharon's story is a testament to how resilient families can be. They find ways to cope, to honor their kids, to fight for change.
Speaking of seemingly safe places, Kyron Horman, 2010 Oregon, vanished from his school's science fair. Last seen with his stepmom. But they've never found any trace of him.
That case is especially baffling because there's basically no physical evidence to go on.
Right.
It really underlines how tough these investigations are when you don't have a crime scene, no witnesses, no clear idea of what happened.
It's like he just vanished into thin air. I can't imagine what his family's going through not having any answers.
The not knowing, the lack of closure, that's often the hardest part for families.
Yeah.
It's like they're stuck, they can't grieve properly, they cling to hope, but they're also terrified of what might have happened.
Okay, for this next one, we're heading over to Australia. William Terrell, 2014. Playing at his foster grandmother's, wearing a Spider-Man costume, and then, poof, gone.
The Tyrrell case, like Madeline's, really resonated internationally, partly because of how young William was, and that picture of him in the Spider-Man suit.
Right.
It really grabbed people's attention, becoming this image of lost innocence.
That picture is so haunting.
It is.
Every time I see it on a missing poster, it just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It makes you think about your own kids, your own family.
These cases have a way of getting to our deepest fears, reminding us how vulnerable kids are, how fragile life can be.
That's true. They make you question everything you thought you knew about safety and security.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got a few more cases in this first part of our deep dive, but let's change gears for a second. This one, while it's not technically an abduction, it still gives me chills. Mary Jane Barker, 1957, 4 years old, disappears from her backyard.
This one is so sad because it seems she just wandered off and got trapped inside an abandoned house. So, not a criminal abduction, but it shows how many dangers there are for kids, even in places they know.
It's a reminder that we have to be vigilant. Even a split second of not paying attention can have terrible consequences. All right, on to a case that's just flat out bizarre. Bobby Dunbar, 1912. Vanishes on a family fishing trip. They figured he drowned. Then they find a boy who looks exactly like him.
And decades later, DNA testing proved that this boy wasn't Bobby Dunbar at all. Mistaken identity, maybe someone meant well, but it's still tragic.
Yeah.
But it raises so many questions. Where is the real Bobby? Who was this other boy?
It's like a mystery novel, a plot twist you don't see coming.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many other cases of mistaken identity are out there. How many families might be living with a truth they don't even know.
It's a scary thought.
Okay, last one for this part, and it's a head-scratcher for sure.
Yeah.
Johnny Gosch, 1982, delivering newspapers in Iowa.
Yeah.
And then gone. But years later, his mother claimed that.
His mother, Noreen, said that Johnny visited her as an adult. He was scared, couldn't tell her where he was. Now, they never confirmed this, but it just added another layer of mystery to the whole thing.
It did.
And fueled all sorts of theories about organized crime and even government conspiracies.
It's one of those details that just stays with you. You hear about these alleged sightings, rumors of kids living in secret, and it makes you wonder what's real and what's just wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered a lot already, but we're just getting started. When we come back, we're going to look at even more cases, explore the bigger themes, and try to piece together what it all means. Stay with us.
Sounds good. Welcome back. Before we get into some of the more recent cases, I think it's worth taking a moment to think about how these stories, as tragic as they are, have really pushed for change.
That's a great point. We talked about Eden Patz's case leading to the sex offender registry and how Cherry Mahan's disappearance got the Have You Seen Me campaign going. It's like these horrible events made society face some hard truths about keeping kids safe.
Exactly. And it goes beyond laws and awareness campaigns, too. These cases have really affected how parents raise their kids. Think about it. A generation ago, kids were out and about in their neighborhoods with so much more freedom than you see today.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I remember walking to school by myself, playing outside until dark. It's crazy how different it is for kids growing up now.
The fear that came from all these high-profile abductions made parents change how they did things.
Yeah.
There was a much bigger focus on supervising kids, on teaching them about stranger danger.
And now There's all this technology to help us keep track of kids, too. GPS trackers, those child safety apps. There's a whole industry built around this anxiety we have as parents.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, though. I mean, those tools give you some peace of mind, but they also show just how much fear there is in parenting today.
Right.
It's this constant struggle, trying to keep your kids safe, but also letting them be independent.
It's a tough balance to find, that's for sure. Okay, we've talked about the wider impact on society, but let's get back to the individual level for a minute. What happens to the families, the whole community, when a child goes missing?
The trauma is immense. There's just this huge hole in their lives, this feeling of loss and uncertainty that never really goes away.
Yeah.
They're dealing with guilt, with anger, and the weight of all those unanswered questions. It's crushing.
I can't even imagine what that must be like, to have your child just disappear, no explanation, no closure.
And that lack of closure, that's often the hardest thing to bear.
Yeah.
It stops them from grieving properly, from moving on. They're stuck in this place where they're always hoping for a miracle, but also fearing the absolute worst.
It makes sense. And it's not just the immediate family that's affected, right?
Uh,
I bet these cases send ripples to the whole community.
Absolutely. It creates this unease, a sense that things aren't safe anymore, like a loss of innocence. Suddenly the world feels less predictable. Neighbors start looking at each other differently, parents become super watchful, and kids lose that carefree joy of just being a kid.
It's a harsh reminder that these tragedies don't just hurt individuals, they really affect the whole community.
You do.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple more cases. Ones that highlight how complicated these disappearances are and the mysteries that just linger. First, Timothy Pitson, 2011. His mom took him on this road trip, and then she was found dead in a hotel room.
This one's a chilling example of a parent taking their child, but with this really haunting twist. Timothy's mom left a note saying he was safe, but would never be found. We still don't know why she did it, and no one knows where Timothy is.
It's one of those cases that just gets to you. You have a mom who clearly loved her son, but then does this drastic, inexplicable thing, and poor Timothy, caught in the middle of it all. It's just devastating.
It really shows how complex parental abductions can be. There are often these hidden struggles within families that can lead to really desperate actions.
Right.
And it underlines the devastating effects on the kids who are left dealing with the trauma and not knowing what happened to them.
It's a reminder that these situations aren't always black and white. There are often layers of complexity and motives we don't understand, which makes them even harder to solve. Okay, let's jump back in time a bit. Angela Hammond, 1991. She was pregnant and disappeared after calling her boyfriend from a payphone.
That case is so unsettling because of that last phone call. She was describing a truck circling her, then she screams, and the line goes dead. It's like something straight out of a horror movie.
It really is. And being pregnant adds another layer of tragedy to it.
It does.
2 lives lost, 2 families left wondering.
Angela's disappearance highlights how vulnerable women are, especially when they're pregnant. And it's terrifying to think that these things can happen so fast, without warning, even when someone's trying to get help.
It's a reminder to always be aware of what's going on around us, to trust our gut feelings, and never hesitate to call for help if we feel threatened. Okay, we've got 2 more cases to go over before we wrap up this part. First, one that really drives home the impact these events have on families. William and Margaret Patterson, 1957, Texas. A brother and sister who disappeared from their home within hours of each other.
The Patterson case is heartbreaking because of that double loss. Losing one child is unthinkable, but 2 so close together, it's just devastating. They suspected foul play, but they never found any sign of those children.
I can't imagine the pain their parents went through, the years of searching, all those unanswered questions that would stay with them forever.
The Patterson case shows how long-lasting these tragedies are, how they affect generations, leaving behind so much grief and unanswered questions.
It's a reminder that the impact of these cases goes far beyond the immediate family, reaching friends, neighbors, the whole community.
It does.
Okay, let's end this section with a case that's so strange it almost feels unreal. Walter Collins, 1928, disappears in Los Angeles. Months later, a boy shows up saying he's Walter.
But he wasn't. Mistaken identity. This boy, for reasons we still don't know, pretended to be Walter. The real Walter was never found, and what really happened to him is still a mystery.
And what makes it so disturbing is that it wasn't just some random mistake. They found out later that the police, wanting to close the case, knowingly brought the wrong boy to Walter's mother, even though she kept saying it wasn't him.
The Walter Collins case is a chilling example of police misconduct and how far authorities might go to hide their own errors.
Yeah,
But it also shows how strong and determined mothers can be when they're fighting for their kids, even when they're up against impossible odds.
it's a story that makes you question the integrity of law enforcement and how vulnerable people are when they're facing these powerful institutions.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this part. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts and questions to think about. Stay with us.
Wow, we've really been through some tough cases in this deep dive. From Eat 10 Pats and those milk carton campaigns to Madeleine McCann and all that global attention, it's clear these tragedies have changed how we see things, how we parent, and just left such a mark on families and whole communities.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I can't stop thinking about the human side of it all. Behind the headlines, behind all those missing posters, there are real people whose lives have been completely shattered. Parents waking up to that empty space every day, kids who've lost their innocence, communities where that sense of security is just gone.
It's true. These aren't just mysteries or numbers on a page. They're real-life tragedies with consequences that run deep and last forever.
Like Noreen Gosh, Johnny Gosh's mother.
Right.
Years she spent searching for her son, following every lead, holding on to that belief that he was out there, alive. Yeah. And Sharon Garrett, Michaela's mother, she took her grief and turned it into action. She became a strong voice for missing kids and their families.
And Kate and Jerry McCann. Their lives were turned upside down when Madeleine vanished. They faced so much scrutiny, so many theories, all while desperately trying to find their daughter.
It's hard to imagine.
It really makes you realize that these cases are about more than just finding answers. It's about acknowledging the pain, the loss, and how it affects those left behind.
Absolutely. And while we might never know everything, some cases may stay unsolved, it's so important to remember the victims, to honor them, and support those who are still searching.
Before we finish this deep dive, I want to ask our listeners something. After hearing all these stories, thinking about how complicated and heartbreaking they are, what do you think is the most likely reason behind these disappearances? Is it stranger abduction, a parent taking their child, a horrible accident, foul play, or something else entirely?
That's a really tough question. There's no easy answer. Each case is different, with its own set of clues and misdirection. There are so many factors involved, and sometimes we just don't have enough to go on to make any real conclusions.
It's frustrating, isn't it? To be stuck with all these unanswered questions, these loose ends. It's like trying to put together a puzzle with pieces missing.
It is. And often, that's the toughest part for everyone involved. The not knowing, the lack of closure, it just drags on, leaving families and whole communities in this state of limbo.
So what can we do?
Yeah.
How can we move forward in a way that remembers these kids and tries to prevent this from happening again?
It starts with being aware. We need to keep these stories in the public eye, not just as warnings, but as reminders of the real people affected by these disappearances.
Yeah.
We need to support the families, the organizations, and law enforcement who are working so hard to solve these cases and keep kids safe.
And we need to talk honestly about how complex these situations are.
Absolutely.
The different kinds of abduction, the risks, the warning signs, we need to talk about it all.
Because the more we know, the better we can protect kids. Knowledge really is power.
Well said. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world of unsolved child abductions. I hope this has shed some light on these cases, got people talking, and maybe even inspired you to get involved in your community.
I hope so too.
Remember, keeping kids safe is everyone's responsibility. Let's work together to create a world where every child is safe, protected, and loved.